A buyer is at $800,000 and my vendor is at $1 million. Surely I can't invite that buyer to the auction. There's a $200,000 gap and you feel deceiving inviting that buyer to auction. That buyer is going to pay more than that, often, most of the time. Tell, think, shift. Tell, think, shift. What do I mean by that? There's 3 vendor prices. The price they tell you. Below that is often the price they're thinking. And sometimes below that is the price they shift to on auction day to sell their home. The buyer's got 3 prices too. The price they tell you, then there's often a price higher than that. The price they're actually thinking, then there's often a price even higher than that. The price they bid to on auction day with competition. Let me tell you a story about a man named Barry, a buyer that I worked closely with to arm him with a bidding strategy to defeat the other bidders and the auctioneer to buy the property of his dreams. A couple of days before the auction, I spent 1 hour with Barry dissecting a strategy and also setting his limit. Barry said his limit was $750,000 and he would not go a dollar above. He'd been in the market for 6 months. There was a very specific style of home he wanted to buy, and it was only the second time this style of home had appeared in the market in the last 6 months. He set his limit at $750,000. He believed the property was worth somewhere between $7 and $770,000. I said, Barry, if someone else bid $760,000, would you be disappointed? He said, yes. Well, I said, let's set your limit at $761,000. I said, Barry, if someone else bid $770,000 and bought, would you be disappointed? He said, I wouldn't go a dollar above $770,000. I said, would you go $771,000? He said, yes. And I kept challenging Barry. I said, what if someone bid $780,000 and they bought it? How would you feel? And he said, Brent, to be honest with you, my wife and I have had a detailed conversation about this. We'd be willing to go to $780,000, but absolutely we wouldn't go a dollar more. We could afford it, but we wouldn't see value and would refuse to pay more than that. I said, are you sure, Barry? He said, yes. I said, what about $785,000? He said, no. I said, what about $781,000? He said, no. $780,000 is our limit. I spoke to Barry after the auction that he bid on. That auction sold. There was 11 bidders. It sold for $825,000. $45,000 above Barry's $780,000 limit. Now, the auction was on a Friday. I gave him a call on the Monday and said, Barry, how do you feel about missing out on that auction? He said, Brent, to be honest with you, my wife and I are extremely disappointed in ourselves. We're actually quite sad. We think we missed out on our golden opportunity. In hindsight, we wished that we'd set a limit of $850,000 as our max and that we would have bid there with confidence to defeat those other buyers and buy that home so we don't need to look around anymore. This is just one example of one buyer. There are tens of thousands of buyers out in our marketplace, many of which have got these similar reflections when they miss out on auctions. There are also many versions of Barry who, unlike Barry, set his limit at $780,000 and regretted it later and actually wished he bid $850,000. Many buyers identify that $850,000 or their max before the auction and bid and execute their plan. If we just take things back to the beginning of this video, if you're dealing with a buyer who's at $800,000 and your vendor's at $1 million and you feel bad inviting that buyer to the auction, $800,000 could actually mean $850,000 or $900,000 or $910,000 or $920,000 or $950,000. The vendor's $1 million could very easily become $980,000 or $960,000 or $950,000. And before you know it, that buyer who was at $8 could now be at $940,000, $950,000. The vendor could be at $950,000 and all of a sudden you've made your match. So don't pretend like you're Nostradamus with price. Tell, think shift, where the vendor's shift price intersects with the buyer's shift price. If the buyer doesn't even know they're going to bid to that level, and if the vendor doesn't even know they're going to shift to that level, how on earth would you know? Yes, let's call a spade a spade. There comes a point that if a buyer is at a certain level, it's deceiving to invite them along to the auction. But just keep in mind, I've seen some really strange things happen. Don't play Nostradamus with price.